I'm going to talk about Djinns and Dragons. We got to be smoking. Fire and air elements here. So, it's funny. This is something that I personally don't want to talk about publicly. To me, it feels like very sacred information, very sacred knowledge that doesn't need to be advertised to the masses, doesn't need to be understood, and the people who need to know it will know it. But um, the Djinns and the Dragons themselves are asking me to speak on it because other people are speaking on it, right? And getting it wrong or confused or just these words mean something. They have an original meaning. And we've gotten really far from that. A lot of people use these words to point to different things that is not what they were originally used for. So I'm getting on here to not read the words, but get back to the original definition, clear up what it is that these things are actually pointing to, because you see a lot of people using the word jinn as a stand-in for like demon or different spirits. And there's a lot of people who talk about working with jinns in terms of magic, identifying with jinns, kind of creating storylines, right? Like the genie and this sort of stereotypical perspective is just very far from what these words are originally referring to. Same with dragons. We have a very, sci-fi fantasy vision of what dragons are, Disney type of idea of what these words are pointing to, and that gets us kind of far from. It gets us off track. It's gotten us off track. So I just have so much resistance to talking about it. It's so funny. So jinns and dragons are both elemental beings. And the way that I'm going to define this on the surface is a very, very simple definition. But the applications of it, the potential, the door that this opens goes very deep in terms of potential applications, potential I'm just going to focus on the definition, and the doors that will open for you are for you. So, okay, jinns is a specific word, right, from the Middle Eastern region, from pre-Islamic cultures and pre-Islamic Arab cultures, right? So this is before Islam, before organized religion. And this is a word that's referring to elemental beings. And there are multiple kinds. There are the fire jinns, the air jinns, the water jinns, and the dust, the sand and earth jinns. But they're all sort of considered air elementals because it's how they move. It's how these elements are moving, right? So air has a certain way of circulating. Water has a certain way of flowing. Fire has a certain way of moving, right? So this word originally was simply just people looking at the elements around them, the dust storms in the desert, the way the river and the rains would come through, the way the fire would dance, and naming that, right? And giving that a giving the spirit the living essence of those elements, giving it something that we can call it by. And ways of identifying specific elements and specific lineages. So not just any river, a specific river. Not just like so Djinns is the name of the species of spirit. And we see this all over the world, right? We see the fae in, the fairy world, right? In Celtic and Northern European cultures. We see, the Orishas in West African and Caribbean traditions, right? We see these different pantheons or just titles, right, that humans are giving to the living elements that they see around them so that they can properly get to know the characteristics of this being, the river. It's an animistic point of view, right? It's looking at the river and going, this is a living entity. And what is your name? Right? It's a relationship. All of these words are pointing to a relationship between the people and the elements that they are living within. And these words are tools for those people developed to be able to call on that river, to be able to identify that type of water. So it's very location specific, okay? And it's also very people specific. It's very specific to the bloodlines and the populations that are coming out of these places. So if you're trying to call on Djinns, but you don't have any of the bloodlines that are associated with that, they're probably not going to hear you. Okay. Same with all these other pantheons, right? If you don't have a connection to the place, the physical geographic location where these spirits reside, there's no line of communication there. There's no line of access. So a lot of people will talk about these things. They'll get it right that they're spirits. And let me say this. I have seen, okay, it's not just bloodlines. That's a very strong way that you can have a relationship to a location that you're not in. But there's also other types of lineages, right? There's other types of spiritual lineages, and then also your soul's lineage. So your soul has a pathway that it's traveled, and some people's soul has a memory of a place that you've never been to in this lifetime, and that you don't have any ancestry, right? That you don't have any of those bloodlines in this lifetime, in this body, and you've never been there, or maybe you have. And that's actually how you can tell where you're connected to, right? Is either where the places you're drawn to and that feel like home, or the places that you sort of can't go, that you're like blocked from going. That's another way that you can tell, like, oh, this is a location that my soul has history with. So that's a whole other conversation of how to identify your soul's footprints from past lives. But it relates, because if some of your past lives were in these locations where these spirits reside, you have a soul level connection to these spirits. And then it's just straight up spiritual lineage too. So you could be of a type, like, let's say that you're from, you have ancestor spirits. And that lineage of Selkies is actually kind of kin to other water sources around the world. So you can see sort of similarities between locations, and that's because the water that's coming through that location is coming from a similar source within the earth or beyond. So you can be connected to, you can have access points that are not just your bloodline. You can have a physical bloodline, you are descended from people who were born from a location that gives you open access to the spirits of that place. Well, I shouldn't say open access because a lot of this has been blocked off. And that's, a lot of people have been purposefully displaced, purposely severed, purposely had these connections tampered with, right? And especially the Jinn. So there was a whole effort to colonize that area of the world a few thousand years ago. And one of the ways that step number one, if you're going to try to occupy and take over a piece of land, is capturing the spirits of that land. And also severing the people from being able to work with the spirits of that land. So taking out the shamans, the witches, the mystics, the people who are serving in that position of communicating between the spirit world and the human world. So you take those people out, you confuse the knowledge, and this is where things like myth and symbolism are used to either invert or reverse or flip or tangle up or bind certain spirits of a land. And you do this by this is where the whole genie in a bottle thing comes from. That concept of trapping spirits. That's how you even begin to enslave a population or to remove a population from a piece of land. And that's how you even begin to that land. You have to, and this is why a lot of these I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because it's fucking ridiculous. The disconnect in terms of how we're understanding colonization, the disconnect from spirituality or I even hate using that word, spirituality. It's just natural relationships between people and the place that they're born out of. And the beings, the trees, the rocks, the rivers, the air flow patterns, all the animals, all the plants, all these things are a reflection of the overall spirit of the place. The people that are born out of a location, they have those qualities because that location has those qualities. We're all awareness and a personality and a presence. And this is what I mean, sentient, an animistic way of seeing the world, right? That looking at a mountain and recognizing that there's layers of life and there's layers of awareness. And we as humans are not the only ones who are sentient beings, right? The animals have, and that there's these, obviously, like, animals and plants are aware and alive, right? But extending that understanding of I'm interacting with a being right now versus I'm just interacting with this inanimate landscape. That is like, that's not spirituality. I feel like this word itself is like, because now we have to define the word spirit, because that also has been used to point to so many different things that it doesn't mean anything anymore. So jinns it's the particular names, like there are names of the tribes. The water jinn are the marids, the fire jinn are the ifrits. Like, they have tribes, but they also have individuals, and those individuals have names. And those are just like pinpointing, like saying like if you say Marids, it's like referring to the entire Tigris and Euphrates river system. But then if you identify an individual Marid or an individual family, it's like zeroing in and pointing to a particular valley, a singular valley that has a spring that feeds into the Tigris Euphrates overall system. So this is what you're doing when you're using names of jinns or symbols to call on them. You're calling on a location, and you're calling on the sentient being that all the water on the planet. And that layer of a planetary sized being is a dragon. So dragon is pointing to a star or a planet or a moon or an asteroid or a galaxy or a nebula, right? Like there's layers within the celestial space. But this is what this is pointing to, is dragons are celestial size, celestial bodies. And this is very large compared to compared to animals, compared to plants, right? A mountain is large compared to us, but a mountain is small compared to a planet. So this is the size relationship between a human, a jinn, and a dragon, right? Is like the jinn is going to be the spirit of the mountain or the valley or the river. The dragon is going to be the spirit of the entire planet, the entire star system, the entire nebula, and the entire galaxy. So they're a bigger dragon, right? Like galaxies are like multiple layers of dragon size, but this layer is so far above us. This is what I consider to be the sixth dimension. So we're in the third dimension, right? We exist in physical material. We have bodies in the third dimension, and above us is the astral, right? The mental plane, the spirit plane. And this is how I define the word spirit, right? Is that it's the layer above the thoughts and emotions. So you can have, and this is where jinns exist. They exist sort of above, like outside, just above us in terms of, well, all humans have a presence in the fourth and fifth dimension, right? In our thoughts and emotions and in these spirits, right? But these spirits it's like they're big, so they're collectives. So when you're pointing to Marids, you're pointing to also a collective of people. You're pointing to all the people that have the bloodline that came out of the Tigris Euphrates area. That's who you're also pointing to the humans that are connected to this overall spirit. And yeah, the dragons, so spirits are susceptible to being locked and bound and severed. And this is what has happened. This is what has happened. This is what a lot of the Abrahamic religions did, is they went in and basically piggybacked off the magic that was already in place. So they would go wherever they would go, they would learn, the names of the spirits of that place. And then they would either create a myth around a story around that character to disempower it or to demonize it. This is why a lot of people see jinn as demons, because they literally have been turned into demons by basically casting them into a certain shadow, right? Like making people afraid of them, right? Like turning that. And then there's other ways where they literally kind of like can almost starve a spirit, like similar similar to the way that, in like bullfighting or like cat what's that word? Rodeos, where they keep the bull like locked up and get it really like agitated and then release it and let it out into an arena. There was, early the early people who were this is where I get upset. Um, the early people who came in and who were doing magic, who were doing witchcraft on behalf of the religions that were taking over, the thing that they did was oftentimes either just separate people from their spirits of the land, make people turn their back, right? Tell them it's evil, tell them it's bad. Um, and that looks like, the idea of sin, the idea of shame, like all of these things together. And then it also gets mirrored within the person, within the individual. So you start to see people turn against their own nature. That's exactly that's the same the thing word as getting the spirit of the nature around them like demonized, like outcast, exiled, like severing them, right? And it has to happen on both levels where the humans are playing it out internally, individually in each home. This is why you get a lot of heavily colonized cultures, right? Like turning on the women and children in the family structure. And that's the same thing as turning on your nature, right? Like turning on the thing that you came out of, the river that you came out of, the woman that you came out of, the people that you came. There's like all of these things are mirroring each other. And they started with the Djinn level. You have to start at that level of, it's like a cascade with magic and witchcraft. If you can get the spirit of the place severed, then all of the people who are born out of that place are going to be severed. So that's a big thing that happened to jinns, is kind of like getting their bottom half, like the upper and the lower halves split in two. And the different kind of bindings that can do that are like I said, shame is kind of a binding that happens on the root area, the lower part of the body, right? Like the very primal desires. Um, that severs it there, but then there's also severs like around sort of the throat or the heart area, with things like grief. And this is why a lot of these practices, things like genocide and war, are actually mass rituals. They're human sacrifice rituals to make the land so full of grief that every single person that's born out of that place is severed in half for generations. And it severs the location. It creates this like feedback effect, where it amplifies itself by pinging back and forth with the people, right? So if you can create that kind of severing, you initiate it on the spirit of the place, and then that generation of people that are born out of it experience that kind of trauma, and then they create their world in the image of that separation. And so they start to build up the world around them. They start to organize their families, their how they interact with the natural world. They start taking advantage and destroying their own place, each other, right? It's like this turning on each other. So this was very heavily done to the jinns, and there was, like I was describing with the bucking bronco image, that was also done where spirits were taken to other locations that were not the place that they were from. And you can only do this after you've severed, like, severely, oh, it makes me so mad. Like how they, how they fuck with the bulls, right? They have to kind of handicap them. And that's kind of how a lot of the rest of the world was colonized by these Abrahamic religions. They would use the jinn, they would sort of capture a jinn in its natural habitat, right? And take it to another location where it has no, it, it becomes destructive in that place. So this is why a lot of cathedrals or different places, when these religions went through Europe and colonized Europe, when they went into the Americas, into Africa, all of these locations, they were basically powering a lot of the the buildings, the structures with stones that had, the essence of these jinn, that had patterns, structures that would sort of invoke these spirits that had basically been tortured and starved and um, made to turn against themselves and against each other. And it's like a lot of damage has been done. A lot of damage has been done through this practice. So this is why it's hard for me to talk about, because it's not just like, oh, you know, fairies and nymphs and like, I mean, this happened to other um, systems, but this was kind of ground zero in terms of this tactic, like in terms of this specific magical tactic of being able to take the names and the symbols of a spirit from a place and capture it and then use it for your, take it to other places and use it to create more problems. um I'm only laughing so I'm not crying. Like it's not okay. And the thing that people need to understand when you call on jinn now, you better be calling to help them out. You better be calling to like help them get back to their homeland or help them get free if they're trapped. If you're working with a jinn and you're not of one of these lineages, if you don't have a soul lineage, a spirit lineage, or a bloodline lineage to back to these places, the Tigris Euphrates area, you're participating in the continued abuse of these spirits. So be careful, because when they do, just like a wild animal that's been captured, when they do get free, they're not happy, right? Unless you help them, right? So it's like, don't, just because spirits are bigger than us doesn't mean that they're immune to any kind of, they don't have they're not evil or good. Like, that's not a thing, just in any dimension. Sometimes, they all have their own personalities, they all have their own strengths and weaknesses, and they all find themselves in different situations. So we're not talking about like a static, you can't just like put a sigil up and like use a name or an invocation and think that you're sort of calling on some kind of static eternal essence that just like exists disembodied from reality. Like, you're not just calling on these things that are, they're animate beings. They're like, they have um yeah, that's why I said it's like simple. It's just when you use the word Djinn or you call on a particular Djinn's name, you are referring to a river and everything that came out of that river, including all the people. So, like I said, that has a lot of implications and applications. Dragons, on the other hand, dragons can't really be trapped. They can be locked out of accessing a certain place that they were. So, planetary-sized beings, we don't see them in the physical in the same way that we see jinns interacting with physical elements like physical rivers, storm systems, right? The jinns, like I said, are in the astral, they're in the spiritual plane, which is part of this one, right? That's part of this realm. And they don't have physical bodies like we do. They exist in the environment, right? In the atmosphere, and the higher atmosphere, the spiritual, the spirit, the fifth dimension. So, but they're in this realm. We're all within a planetary body. We're all within a dragon. We're all underneath the sixth. If you think about the dimensions as, pathways, different ways that these beings are moving. And so when we look at something like solar storms, I see that as seeing the dragon. That's how we perceive dragons directly, is light. The light that's coming from the sun, the light that's coming from within the planet, the heat, all of the lava. That's us. That's where we can see dragons. But we can't see beyond the fifth dimension from the third dimension. Like, I mean, we see the stars, we see the sun, we feel the heat on your body, like you experience it. But you're not going to see it in like a physical form because its physical form is in the sixth dimension. There's no way that from the third dimension you can perceive that because you're inside it. That would be like the little bacteria in your gut trying to picture what you look like on the outside. There's no way, right? It's just swimming in the water that is your gut. That's what we are inside a dragon. So we don't have a reference point. There's no way you can actually see the physicality of a dragon. That's why I say the Disney or the sci-fi version is very misleading, right? Because there's this mythological beast image that we have now. When we say dragon, we think of this kind of serpentine, wings, right? And this is our way. Originally, this is what, the feathered serpent, the bird and the serpent imagery is pointing to dragon, like things like the Thunderbirds, same thing. That's another way that we see the dragon that we're inside is thunder and lightning. And I believe that that is the nervous system, that like we're seeing like the electricity of the planet of lightning is like us seeing the thoughts, the mind of the dragon. Same with the sun. It's like that's the dragon's like awareness, like focus, conscious. That's the dragon's conscious focus. So, that's why it's hot, because you're like in the hot seat because the dragon's looking at you. So yeah, there's star level dragons, but then there's like planetary level dragons. And I think that the serpent imagery is there for a reason, right? And that's why we also have a lot of different traditions that point to serpentine type of beings living on the inside of the planet, like the Nagas in more Eastern mythology, that's what that word is pointing to, is the beings that live in the magma, in the crystalline structures inside the planet. Um, because the scale of these beings is so large and they move very fluid. It's like we're trying with these images and these words like dragon and the way that we describe it, like a serpent with wings. Well, what is that? That's like rivers and magma. Like the serpent is like that fluid movement that happens if you've ever seen the lava flows coming out of a volcano, right? It looks like this kind of body of a dragon. So it's this fluid movement, but then the wings is like flying, right? So that's a very specific point symbolism pointing to star beings, beings that are the size of the stars. Same with thunderbirds. That's a way of saying the birds that are making the thunder, making those storms. Like you, we can feel them. We're affected by their movements, but we cannot directly see them. This is the sixth dimension. So they can't technically be trapped in the third dimension. But they can be like, they have these access points and pathways that they use to travel, right? There's certain characteristics that similar to Djinn, right? There's like water dragons and more like fire dragons, and they have different locations that they and stars and different pathways, nebulas, etc., through the cosmos that they're kind of like that's what we're seeing when we look up and see nebulas. It's like not the dragon itself, not the dragon's physical body, but the dragon's ripple that it's making as it's passing through those waters in the sixth dimension. It's like that's what we see is like light. Right? So a lot of dragons have been just locked out. That's what a lot of sort of monuments, there's a lot of bridges and dams and different, cathedrals, again, like these religious buildings that are built over like doors or portals that dragons would use, and so they're no longer able to get through, or there's also kind of like a weird desire, I think, to like summon them in some way, like not even summon dragons, but like I think if you can get a dragon, like if you kind of like if you imagine we're a fish under the water and the dragon is above the water looking in, if you can make a bunch of, you know, movements in the astral waters, the dragon's gonna like take an interest. They're like, if you can, I think a lot of these religions are attempting to kind of get the interest of a dragon. um but that seems like maybe another conversation or just a conversation for another time. um yeah, is that all I want to say about Djinns and Dragons? There's what I really want to say is that these beings are living beings. They're not good or evil. They're very dangerous if you are not in right relationship with them. Just like a wild animal, just like you have respect for a bear in the woods, you have respect for a lion. It's a similar same. I mean, just plant simple with lava. You don't go up to the lava and like, right? Like you have respect, you stay the fuck away from it. Same with a raging river. You're not gonna just be like, oh, cool. So when we're pointing to djinns and dragons, that's the same level of like reverence and like respect. It's not even reverence, it's just respect. Just have respect. Have respect and know what it's pointing to, because if you try to call on a particular dragon with a particular name, and or if you try to call in a djinn with a particular name or whatever, but you don't have a concept of the fact that it's like, if you're expecting it to be a literal, like, Disney genie coming out of a bottle, or if you're expecting to get 3 wishes, or if you're expecting to be able to, have it, like, move things with its, telekinesis, like, all these it's not that. It's not all of these, like, fantasy sci-fi things. It's just that means that you are calling on a location, a spirit of a location, and there's infinite applications to that. So, yeah, I think that's it. It just makes me so uncomfortable to talk about because it's something that, I personally have a lot of day-to-day interactions with these kinds of beings, and so, um, I don't know, just putting it out on the internet feels it's very dear to my heart and my lineages, and it's something that we have protected, and I think for some reason now it's more important that people get access to these kinds of perspectives instead of keeping them hidden. So here it is.